It begins in the fog-choked alleys of Victorian London, a city divided by gas lamps, class wars, and cobblestone streets soaked in mystery. In 1888, something terrifying took root in Whitechapel, an impoverished district where shadows hid more than just poverty. Women were being brutally murdered, their bodies left in alleys, courtyards, and stairwells mutilated with horrifying precision. And then, from the darkness, a name emerged that would haunt history for centuries. Jack the Ripper. The world didn't know who he was. Not then, not now, but the myth spread faster than the blood could dry on cobblestones. He was called everything: a surgeon, a demon, a ghost, even a member of the royal family. Whispers turned into newspaper headlines, and suddenly this faceless murderer had an identity crafted not by evidence but by fear, speculation, and the rising power of the press. One of the greatest myths, that Jack the Ripper was a singular genius, a phantom figure who outwitted police at every turn. Newspapers of the day fed the hysteria with letters supposedly written by the killer himself. The most infamous, the Dear Boss letter, signed with a name that would become legend. But what if those letters weren't from the killer at all? What if Jack was created as much by editors as he was by the streets? Another myth? That the Ripper only killed 5 women, known today as the canonical 5. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. Their names are etched in true crime history. But there were others, many others, who met a similar fate. The question is, were they all killed by the same hand? Or did the legend of the Ripper inspire copycats in an already violent city? Then there's the idea that Jack was surgically skilled, that he removed organs with medical precision. But real coroner reports are conflicted. Some describe messy cuts, inconsistent patterns, a lack of true anatomical knowledge. Yet, the media fed the narrative. A deranged doctor, stalking women in silence, dissecting not just their bodies, but the soul of London itself. The truth is, Jack the Ripper didn't just murder 5 women, he murdered safety. He murdered the illusion that the police could protect people. He killed trust in the institutions. He weaponized fear in a way few criminals ever have. The legend turned into a monster, growing larger with every retelling. And London and the world fed it books, films, conspiracy theories. Everyone had a theory. Was he a failed medical student? A member of the Freemasons? Prince Albert himself? With no arrest, no confession, and no closure, the public filled in the blanks with whatever suited the drama. And that's the danger of myth. It makes horror easier to digest. It simplifies evil. It gives it a name, a shape, even a costume: a black cloak, a top hat, a surgical knife. But the real Whitechapel? It was chaos. Dirty, desperate, and teetering on the edge of lawlessness. Jack didn't need to be a genius to vanish, he just needed the world to be broken enough to let him die. As the decades passed, Jack the Ripper morphed from criminal to cultural icon. The first true crime superstar, a symbol of evil, endlessly reinterpreted through horror films, novels, podcasts, and YouTube channels. But behind the silhouette lies something messier, something more human and more horrifying, because the scariest part of the Jack the Ripper story isn't the myth of a ghost-like killer. It's how little we actually know, how easily facts were buried beneath headlines, and how quickly a city and the world turned fear into entertainment. In the next chapter, we'll strip away the legend. We'll look at the real reports, the evidence, and the modern investigations that try to separate fiction from fact. Because Jack the Ripper may be a myth, but his victims were real, and so is the truth we've tried to ignore. Behind the chilling myth of Jack the Ripper lies a truth that's far less cinematic and far more disturbing. While the name Jack the Ripper conjures images of a calculating genius in a top hat, operating with surgical precision in the shadows of London, the facts reveal something murkier, messier, and perhaps even more terrifying. That the real killer may not have been some master criminal at all, but simply a product of chaos, media frenzy, and a failing justice system. Let's start with the victims. The canonical 5: Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly are the names that dominate the headlines of history. But crime scene reports and coroner files from that time hint at a different story. There may have been more victims or perhaps fewer. Some modern researchers argue that one or more of the five may not have been killed by the same person. The brutality of their murders varied. Some had organs removed, others didn't. Some were killed indoors, others outdoors. These inconsistencies are often overlooked in favor of a clean, digestible narrative. But real investigations aren't clean. They're chaotic. The idea that Jack the Ripper was a surgeon or medically trained, largely debunked. Several pathologists at the time disagreed on the skill level of the mutilations. One called them crude. Another believed the killer had a basic knowledge of anatomy at best. No conclusive proof ever tied the crimes to a doctor, and the romanticized image of a deranged physician stalking prostitutes with a scalpel was likely amplified by sensational journalism, not evidence, and the infamous Ripper letters. They're a case study in media manipulation. The Dear Boss letter, which first coined the name Jack the Ripper, was received by the Central News Agency, not by the police. It's widely believed that many, if not all, of the Ripper letters were hoaxes, some likely written by journalists themselves to keep the story alive in print. Only one letter, found near the body of Catherine Eddowes and marked with blood, has ever been taken semi-seriously, and even that one is debated. So why didn't the police catch him? It wasn't because Jack was a ghost. It was because Victorian-era policing was woefully underdeveloped. No fingerprinting, no DNA, no organized crime scene preservation. Detectives were forced to rely on interviews, loose patterns, and eyewitness testimony in the foggiest, most densely packed and impoverished part of London. The slums of Whitechapel were filled with crime, drunkenness, and poverty. People often didn't want to speak to the police. Some were afraid, some were complicit, and some simply didn't trust the law. Despite these challenges, police weren't as clueless as the myth suggests. They questioned dozens of suspects. They deployed undercover officers. They created one of the first criminal profiles ever recorded decades before the FBI made it standard. That profile described a man of low intelligence, possibly with a mental disorder, and a hatred of women, particularly sex workers. Nothing about a wealthy doctor, nothing about royalty. Modern researchers and criminal profilers have brought us closer to likely suspects. One strong possibility: Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber and known paranoid schizophrenic who was institutionalized shortly after the last murder. His name appears in police memos from the time. In 2014, controversial DNA evidence linked him to one of the victims, though experts still debate the quality and contamination of that evidence. Other suspects include Montague John Druitt, a barrister who died by suicide after the final canonical killing, and Michael Ostrog, a criminal with known violent tendencies. But the truth is, no one has ever been definitively proven to be Jack the Ripper, and over 130 years later, that void has been filled by speculation, books, and TV documentaries more concerned with mystery than fact. The real story is a brutal 5, maybe more, women murdered in a forgotten part of the city. Lives cut short not by a mysterious phantom in the mist, but likely by a disturbed, possibly local man, someone whose anonymity was protected not by brilliance, but by a system unprepared for his brutality. Jack the Ripper didn't vanish into the night because he was a genius. He disappeared because he could, in a city that failed to protect its most vulnerable. As we sift through the myth and uncover the facts, one thing becomes clear: the real horror isn't in what we don't know about Jack, it's in what we choose to believe.